Today, we are excited to debate polarizing prospects. Which Texas wide receiver should you take? Which RBs are potential league winners? Make sure to stick around to find out. And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. I'm your host, Justin. Joining me, as always, my co-hosts, David and JP. This is our last episode before the NFL Draft. So we are excited to bring to you some polarizing prospects. Today we have been doing a lot of research. We're excited to dig our heels in and get into some debates. But first, we're going to start our show off with our community question. And we will wrap things up today with a little draft game. We're excited to make a few predictions and bring them to you. That being said, going to go ahead and throw it to David to read our last week's community question.
Yeah, so if you've been with us for the first couple episodes, you'll notice we've put this at the beginning of the show instead of the end. Let us know if you like that. We're just kind of trying to change things up till we find something we really like. And then if you haven't been, you're kind of maybe confused about what our community question is. We like to take this segment to kind of shine the light back on you guys. We want to learn from you. We want to, help grow together. So we ask a question in our main show, and then we give you a week to respond. And then the next week we go over that question. We read some responses and give our thoughts on it. So if you'd like to participate, we would really appreciate that. For last week's question, we asked, how much does unexpected draft capital, either good or bad, impact your rookie rankings? So JP, why don't you start us off with an answer?
Sure thing. Our first response here we have from, I want to say it's pronounced Slammin' Salmon. He says, to me, unexpected draft capital doesn't affect my opinion too much unless it's a big jump. I think the reason why it doesn't impact me much is because of the Clyde Edwards-Helaire situation. He ruined it for me. Just because a player gets high draft capital doesn't mean he's more talented than the other. Talent wins out to me.
And on our YouTube channel last week, he did also want to give a quick shout out to the Rocket Power Dynasty League we're in together. So wanted to mention that real quick as well. Thanks for the response, Salmon.
And to respond to his answer here, I think these are great. It's a great example list there with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. We do want to look back on history and see, what mistakes we did make, and that is a great example there. And I think ultimately it shows you need to have a good balance of wing talent and situation, but you're going to want to side more with talent in most situations here.
And for the next question here, want to give a big thanks to Awesome Dumpling. He's been commenting on all our videos. Really appreciate it. Means a lot. And he said, for me, I initially leaned on the idea that talent beats everything. However, I think recently situation has mattered a ton. Last season, JSN goes to a bad landing spot and Rashee Rice goes Chiefs. Texans were perceived as the worst team in football, which caused a down opinion on Stroud/Dell. It's tough, but I want to lean on talent, especially if the situation is a big surprise in either way. So kind of a little bit of the opposite direction from the first one, kind of trying to remember that situation can make a difference, but also acknowledging the Stroud-Dell side of it. So I think this is a really great question because this response really paints both ends of the spectrum. In one draft class, we're going to see people who hit both sides.
And our final response here from Trav Bob, another who's been commenting often. We really appreciate you, Trav. He says, draft capital I learned last year may be less important. Pre-draft, Stroud was my guy. Price going 101 made him jump. I wish I stuck to my priors and took more Stroud. Also, if a player we think should go round 1 ends up going round 3, the NFL is telling us something. Maybe be careful. I think that those are both great points, and I think a lot of us fell into the Stroud-Bryce Young trap last year. I don't think it's wrong to listen to the NFL there, but also when you're talking about first overall pick to second overall pick, maybe do stick to your evaluation there. And then another thing I'll point out that he kind of alluded to there, it's really important to listen. To me, it's more important when a player falls, though. When a player falls, all 32 teams are giving you input on that player. They're all saying, we didn't want to draft him before the spot he goes. But when a player goes higher than expected, that only means that one team thought he should go there. Maybe others did as well, but we only know for sure that one team thought he was going to go that high. So to me, when we see a slide like Zach Evans or Isaiah Spiller or something, we need to listen a little more than when we see someone jump up like maybe Jonathan Mingo or something. But that doesn't mean to ignore the information the NFL gives you altogether. It's just you're getting a lot more information when they fall.
All right, and JP, what are your thoughts on this question here?
I think when it comes to the first 3 rounds, I think you should make some adjustments if there is a drastic fall. David gave a great example. I mean, if they fall a round or 2, then yeah, you're getting input from every single team essentially. But I don't want to overreact too much if it's not a a huge fall. I mean, if it is half a round or so. But sometimes a guy will fall a bit just because the player doesn't fit the team's needs or their situation. There's a group of 5, 10, 12 teams. So I just don't want to overreact too much of it. You can't ignore it altogether. You have to take it into account. Wide receivers on day 3, I think them specifically, if they fall a round or a round and a half further than expected, I think I'm just going to stick to what I believe in that player. And that's kind of what happened with Puka. People before the draft, they liked him as a late 3rd, early 4th NFL draft pick. But then he fell to, I want to say it was the 5th. He fell later than expected. So I know a lot of people kind of push him a lot further down the draft board, and you're able to get him off waiver wires. Or if you had a 4th round in your rookie drafts, then you're able to get him there. So yeah, I like Puka. I got him in a spot, thankfully. But yeah, I just want to make sure I don't overreact to day 3 as much, because I think some teams are going even more for need in day 3.
This is a interesting year to discuss this. Obviously, we are having a lot more discussions because of the Puka situation. Tank Dell was a 3rd round draft pick, but still, historically speaking, 3rd round wide receivers are not an incredibly high value bet to make. So we saw a lot of hits last year. I think for me, it's really going to depend on the way that the market trends for this. If the market trends to seem to really be seeking it out, which I think they're going to be seeking it out this year, I think I might go the opposite direction and zag when everyone else is zigging, or maybe I'm supposed to do that the other way. Is it zigging while they're zagging? I've never been that good at sayings like that, but I think it's going to depend on what the market's doing, because I think everyone is kind of reacting strongly to that aspect. I know everyone's looking for the next Puka, the next Tank Dell. So if everyone is doing that, then I might just follow draft capital a little bit more because of just the historical correlation that we see there. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the community does, and I think that doing the opposite could potentially have a advantage, although you do still want to think and make your own opinions, not just decide what you're doing based on doing the opposite of other people. And David, can you go ahead and tell the fine people what our next week's community question is?
Sure. So for next week, we want to know, when do you guys like to have your rookie drafts and why? Are you pre-draft, pre-NFL draft people? You like to be kind of crazy like that and lean on your evaluations? Like to do it right after the NFL draft? Maybe you like a little more space. You like, rookie camps to happen. Maybe do it in the middle of the summer. So let us know.
Absolutely. So those of you watching on YouTube, go ahead and comment down below right now. When do you like having your rookie drafts and why? Also, feel free to suggest questions for following weeks. You can also reach to us at DinoConFF on Twitter, email dinoconstructionff@gmail.com, or we do have our individual Twitter handles all in the episode description wherever you are listening as well. So that being said, thank you so much for participating in our community question. Honestly, like every time we see you guys respond, we get stupid excited. So we love it. Thank you all so much. That being said, we are also stupid excited to talk our polarizing prospects. We have been getting into it in our sleeper chat quite a bit recently. The sleeper chat, several Discord channels that are only supposed to be for like development stuff, it has spilled over into it's like fighting in the streets a little bit. And we're excited to bring that debate to you next. So what we're going to do for this is going to be a kind of debate style where we're going to have one person arguing for, one person arguing against. We've broken up the debate into a few different segments: athleticism, production, and then closing arguments, which is going to include things we've kind of interested in narrative wise or film stuff that we've heard from our favorite film or NFL guys, scouts, that type of stuff, and really try to make a good argument both ways. So we're going to have one person mediating while the other two take a different stance on the topic. And our first mediator is going to be none other than David. So, David, go ahead and get us ready to fight.
Yeah, I think you guys have been ready to fight on this one for a while. This prospect and the second prospect kind of inspired this entire show, really. So I'm going to stay out of this as much as possible and just kind of let you two have the floor. Our first prospect is Xavier Worthy. Justin will be taking the for side and JP will be taking the against. So let's start with athletics. Justin, go ahead and lead us off.
I mean, just first of all, we're looking at the fastest man alive. I mean, I guess he's no Usain Bolt, but he did just run the fastest 40 time. I know it's the Underwear Olympics, and I loved this guy before that. I love him even more because of it, because I think it secures draft capital. He also has really great deceleration as well as his acceleration. So, in watching him in film, which I've done a little bit of this week, you're going to see that he really has this ability to turn on a dime. So, like on a quick curl comeback route, he is able to really he already has a little bit of a cushion just because he's so fast. And with the way that he's able to decelerate so quick, I think he's going to be able to gouge NFL defenses at the next level. And if he does a double move, I think he's going to be able to burn people with that speed. It's just really impressive. Also, super duper explosive as far as a 10-foot 11-inch broad jump and a 41-inch vertical. I do wish I saw him run the 3-cone drill at the combine, but I think he pretty much put all of his training time into just nailing that 40.
Can't disagree that the 40 time probably did help his draft capital a little bit, but we've seen from a production standpoint and fantasy football that the fastest wide receivers, they haven't necessarily been hits. I'm not saying that he is all the exact same as these guys, but in the last 15 years, 14 wide receivers ran faster than a 4.32. None of them have had 1,000 receiving yards. Curtis Samuel, he's been the best guy, the closest one to do it, and he's 196 pounds. So he's at combine weight, 30 pounds heavier. So I don't think just based on the 40 time, I'm just going to really bump him up a whole lot. Like you said, it's the Underwear Olympics. I wonder if you threw pads on him, if he would still be that much faster than the guys, that are closer to 200 pounds. But yeah, he's still extremely fast. I can't knock him for that.
I think it is impossible to deny that he is fast. But let's go ahead and move on. How does that speed translate to the field? Justin, how do you do on the field?
Yeah, so I mean, as an 18-year-old, you've already heard me say this in several episodes, broke out with an almost 40% dominator ranking, 27.8% career target share. A lot of people have this knock on him that he had his best season as a rookie. And while that is definitely true dominator-wise, it's also true yards per route run-wise. From a counting stats number, he actually had 13 more receptions and 23 more yards this past year. The big difference, especially from a dominator standpoint, was the touchdowns, which historically are not a sticky stat. So I'm not worried that he did not have that sort of like big time dominator rating this season when his yards were actually higher. So he's got a 7.3 yards after catch per reception, also 2.21 career yards per route run. That was 2.61 as an 18-year-old freshman as well. So just a fantastic statistical profile I'm really excited about.
They did have a great freshman season, and he kind of continued that all 3 years. I do wish that I had seen him blow up, 1,300 plus yards the way like Troy Franklin, Adonai, the top guys have. But he was solid all 3 years. But I am a little more concerned with the advanced stuff like the contested catch rate. I mean, obviously, we mentioned that he is smaller. On reception perception, when I look at his data that Matt Harmon took, which he watches all the routes for the wide receivers. He takes an 8-game sample. So it's not the full season, but in his data, he had an 18.2% contested catch rate, which the next lowest was 42.9. So it was like clearly the worst out of the 13 guys that he has charted. He also goes down on first contact a lot, which won't surprise you at that size as well. The data shows that he did on first contact went down at the second highest rate. He was used a lot on screens. I think some of his stats were padded with screens. 26.8% of his targets were screens. So that does worry me a little bit. With the speed, I think that's part of the reason. I can't say definitively, but just narrative-wise, I think the reason he produced right out the gates is because the depth chart around him, it was pretty poor, and he was just extremely fast. So that was going to automatically translate onto the field.
I think those are some interesting points on both sides. JP, why don't you go ahead and give us your closing arguments? I'll let Justin go last since this is his pro argument.
When I look deeper at reception perception, I see a little more of the size show up with the press score. He was 28th percentile. I don't think that he's going to be able to run out as an X wide receiver in the NFL. He also has a poor run blocking grade as well. I think that there's a chance it could limit his snaps. If he's the number one wide receiver on the team, he'll probably stay on a lot. But if he gets the 2 or 3, that could limit the amount of time he's on the field because of that run blocking. He doesn't win as a contested catch guy. His yak, he does do fine there because he's fast if you get him in space. Until somebody touches him, he does go down a little easier, as I mentioned. But as a route runner, he was about average against man and zone as well. I'm just not super impressed by his hands either. His second season, he had one of the highest drop rates in college. His archetype, I'm a little bit worried of. The smaller, speedy guy, I mean, we've seen it with like Jameson Williams and Hollywood Brown, Marvin Mims. I think that these guys are comparable. I think that there is an outcome that he is Hollywood Brown in the NFL, which, you wouldn't be massively disappointed in. I just don't know if he has the upside to be like a wide receiver 1, top 20 guy in the NFL. And from a fantasy standpoint, I think that because of the speed, I think he's going to be typecast into a role where he is a deep threat. And I think that's going to be a little bit more volatile for fantasy purposes. Could be a guy where you don't know when to start him week to week, and he threatens the defense deep and might not see as many targets more valuable to his NFL team than in fantasy.
That was a lot of words to say when you could have just said, I'm wrong, but that's fine. I'm going to walk you through a lot of why you were wrong. We're going to start with that bad drop rate in 2022. So I've got some pretty bad luck here. I've broken both of my wrists twice, and Xavier Worthy had a broken hand in 2022. And I can tell you, with a broken hand, it's hard to catch a football. But this man has that dog in him. He fought through that. He played. Also, he's got that dog in him at the combine. Like, this man had already ran the fastest time. He knew this 4.25 is the fastest time. He's like, I'm doubling down. I'm running again. Like, to me, that's like that Rome Odunze thing of he's like out there running the 3-cone drill again and again. And he would have ran that a third time, he said, if they would have let him, because he thinks he'd have been faster a third time even. He is the wide receiver 1 3 years in a row on a team with plenty of NFL talent. Bijan, JT, Sanders, Roshan, Brooks, AD, Mitchell over the last few years, and still the wide receiver 1 each year that he is here. Gonna play a little game here. This is a interactive thing with you guys. I want to get set up because I control the banners. So 2 players have had a sub 4.3 speed and a greater than 2.5 yards per team pass attempt season. Who is the other player? Any guesses here? I'll go with David first because I like you better right now.
I know the answer because I've seen this. So,
well, then I'm gonna go to JP because I want to see if he has a guess.
Is this a recent one or no?
Within the last few years, yeah.
Sub 4.3, higher than 2.5 yards. I'm telling you, I don't know. I'm not sure.
The other player is one Jalen Waddle, who I think as a kind of high-end comp is not unattainable for this guy. You're throwing out Hollywood Brown and these other names when I'm telling you that this guy, I think, is faster and better than those guys. I think that we are going to see with him. I'm not saying I think he's going to end up being Waddle, but I do think that he is going to carve out himself personally, I believe, as the wide receiver 4 in this class. His QB not accurate. And this is relevant for, of course, all pass catchers, but watching the film, you frequently see him just behind the defense, wide open. He's also a guy that these manufactured touches that they're giving him, these screenplays and stuff they're giving him instead of other players on the team, is because he's the best player on the team and they want to get him the football so that they can win games. You get your playmakers the ball. So the fact that a team is saying we have to figure out ways to get him the football, our quarterback's not that great, so we'll get it to him where he can, and he's the guy we're going to prioritize in those situations, that's not a knock. That's, if anything, a plus, saying this guy needs to be involved. And it's not like that was all that he did. He also led the team in passes over 20 yards down the field as well. So he was a deep threat as well as that guy, as well as a guy who can run some nice intermediate routes. He's not the best route runner in the class, but he is a good enough route runner, especially given his speed and what that does to a defense. He's also expected to be a mid to late first round draft pick. I think there's no way he makes it out of the first round. And what that's going to allow him as terms of development and time to get onto the field early and often is going to be critical.
Let's go ahead and move on. That's plenty to talk about with Xavier Worthy. I think y'all can draw your own conclusions from that. Let's go ahead and talk about the other Texas wide receiver, the other piece of this debate that I've been hearing for weeks. And if you were wondering, yes, JP will be taking the pro and Justin the against here. So JP, let's start us off with some athleticism about AD Mitchel.
Absolutely. Yeah, AD Mitchel, I'd argue he's a better athlete than his teammate. He has the 11th best RAS score of the last 3,063 combine wide receivers since 1987. So with at his size, at 205 pounds, he ran a 4.35. I mean, this guy, he's a freak athlete.
I do not disagree with that. Let's hear what you got to say in the negative about his athleticism. Anything, Justin?
No comments.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and talk about the production. I think that's where the real meat of this argument happens anyways.
Yeah, and I think that this is the thing that most people are scared of, and I think there is a lot to be scared of here. I totally understand from an analytical standpoint, but let's take a look at his career. As a freshman at Georgia, he had 426 yards and 4 touchdowns. And as a freshman in college, I don't know if everybody knows, but anything over like 300 receiving yards as a freshman is a pretty good season for a freshman. But he was playing with Brock Bowers, he was playing with Ladd McConkey, he was playing with Jermaine Burton, and he still had pretty solid production. As a sophomore, he was expected to take a step forward, but he had a high ankle sprain in week 2, and he wasn't healthy until the playoffs, unfortunately. So his stats, the whole season was pretty much just thrown out the window, unfortunately. But then after that, going into his junior year, he transferred over to Texas. And his production here, it was solid, but he had to learn a new system. He's playing alongside, NFL talent with Worthy and Jatavian Sanders. And I don't think that the quarterback play was that good, as Justin mentioned with the Worthy argument. He put up 845 yards and 11 touchdowns. So pretty solid production for his first year over there in Texas. His yards per route run, that is one thing that is a real wart on his profile. I can't excuse it, but I can explain some of why that is. And like I said, with the new system, new quarterback, and that I just don't think Quinn Ewers is that great. He didn't get all that, the manufactured touches as well that Worthy did get. Mitchel dealt with the 7th highest off-target throw percentage in 2023. He was more of a downfield vertical player. And from everything I hear about Quinn Ewers is he's not the kind of guy who was making these high difficulty throws, down the field, breaking out towards the sideline. So I think that quarterback really hurt for the ex wide receiver here at Texas personally.
I love this segment because it's very easy for me to poke holes in his analytical profile.
Sure.
So his career best yards per route run of 1.72 is honestly terrible. To put this kind of a little bit in perspective, we have guys like other one-year breakout producers, and he only had 1 year of meaningful production that we really care about at all. 300, 400 yards as a freshman, it's fine. It shows that they can ball a little bit, but it's not a breakout. It's not anything that we're writing home about. Compared to like a Xavier Legette, with a north of 3 yards per route run in his one breakout year compared to a Brian Thomas Jr. with a great yards per route run. The other guys with only 1 year here, I'm pretty willing to say there's a good chance I'm taking even a Leggett with a decent first round or early second round landing spot over AD Mitchell in my rookie draft potentially. It's going to depend on the landing spots, but I'm open to it, especially if I don't like AD's landing spot. His breakout season, 40% of teams' touchdowns, 20% of the team's yards, per Austin Abbott FF on Twitter. I'm not sure what his source was, but he only had him down having a handful, 4 contested catches this year. So maybe that's just because Quinn Ewers is not looking to throw it to him a lot. But Xavier Worthy had 5 for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think we get it. Quinn Ewers isn't that good, guys. Let's go ahead and get some closing arguments. Justin, what else you got to say to wrap this up?
So we're projecting this guy is going to take this big leap at the next level because he's toolsy, he's athletic, he's got all of these traits that he just doesn't seem to put together consistently on the field. We haven't seen him do it for multiple years, and he did it. That's an air quotes for the podcast crowd, but not really with advanced metrics that we care about that he really broke out, in my opinion. Like I said, that touchdown bit being so much of it. He doesn't really have that dog in him like other players we may have mentioned. He takes plays off. People say it's because he knows he's not in the progression, perhaps, so he's just like taking this play off. I don't think that's going to jive. There are a little bit of concerns with him and diabetes I've been hearing over the last years. I'm not a doctor. We're not medical professionals here. However, I have read some anonymous quotes from teams. They're worried about his maturity in dealing with this and how to handle it. And also, just if you do look up the number of players who have been successful with diabetes, just in professional sports in general, pretty low. In the NFL as well, pretty low. So that's a hurdle to get over. The final thing is going to be the cost for me. I think you're going to potentially see him going as early as 109. And I think it's irresponsible to recommend taking him over Ladd, BTJ, Worthy, and I see him very similar to a guy like Leggett. I'd take Franklin over him more likely than not because of years of production. Unless I'm taking him at the 202 at the earliest, preferably the 203, I'm probably not taking him. So I don't think I'm going to have a very high exposure to this guy unless he goes to the Bills. That's probably the only way that I'm excited about this guy, and I think they'd have to trade up.
JP, let's go ahead and hear your closing arguments for the pro side.
You say he only had 1 year as a breakout, but like I mentioned, he missed his sophomore season. He didn't have the chance to. Xavier Worthy, he did break out as a freshman, as you mentioned. But if you look at all the other first-round wide receivers, none of them broke out as a freshman. So, yeah, the only season that he broke out was as a junior, but that was the only chance he really had, unless he did as a freshman and was a true outlier there. And there is that narrative that he does take plays off. But I heard from Matt Harmon, he watched the Texas wide receivers. He said they're all doing it. He said, I don't know why AD Mitchell's getting all the hate. He said, I see Worthy do it. I see the other guys do it. For some reason, AD Mitchell, he's the one that catches the flack for it. That's just what he said, and he watches the film. With AD Mitchell, he just flashes tantalizing upside as an X wide receiver. Over there at reception perception, he had an 84th percentile success rate versus man, 83rd versus press. That's what you want to see in an X wide receiver. They're going to play against more press and more man on the outside as an X, and he is one of the best in the class at that specific spot. AD Mitchell also, I mean, what I'm going to say, you say the stats, I'm going to say look at the film. The guys that watch the film, they love AD Mitchell. He's wide receiver 5 for Trevor Sikkema at PFF, wide receiver 5 for Daniel Jeremiah. I didn't pull up everybody's. That was some of the first few that I looked at. Matt Harmon likes him as well. And I think this guy has some of the best ball skills in the class. Justin, you mentioned it with the Dominator. It was mostly touchdowns, but he is a great touchdown threat. Daniel Jeremiah here, he says he has some wow catches on fades and 50-50 balls. He can climb the ladder, hang, and finish. On NFL.com, Draft Profile says about his ball skills, he's got a ridiculous catch web, bringing in off-frame throws from all direction. He's a patient long ball tracker and noted jump ball winner. So he has that ability in the red zone to make those contested catches. He's got the size for it and the athleticism to go alongside with that. And with his hands, he had a 2.2% drop rate, which Yeah, that just shows he's got some great hands. I just think no matter what, when he comes into the NFL, if he doesn't develop, a ton more, I think no matter what, he's going to be a top-notch red zone threat with that athleticism and those skills. And I'm telling you, if you listen to film guys, listen to your favorite film guy. I haven't heard many that hate A.D. Mitchell. That might be somewhat subjective, but there's a lot of guys that they say, yeah, his stats, his yards per out run are lower, but viewers, I don't think he's looking his way as much. Like I said, I don't think he likes that X wide receiver kind of higher difficulty of throw. He doesn't feel as comfortable personally. So I just think that A.D. Mitchell, outside of the top 4 wide receivers, Brian Thomas Jr. at 4, I think that he clearly has the most upside outside of that top 4 with his size, his speed, his hands, and the route running as an X wide receiver.
I think A.D. Mitchell truly is one of those data versus film arguments. There's not a whole lot to support the production profile, but I've definitely heard a lot of the things you've heard, JP. A lot of people that watch the film like the things he does. It's definitely an interesting argument. Let us know in the comments below who you think won, how you feel about A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy, and let us know if we missed something.
JP, how about we make a little bit of a bet about this, huh? How do you feel about that?
Oh, I'm down. Worthy versus AD?
Yeah, so we've hashed this out a little bit pre-show that we had were the higher year 1 PPR points per game finish. Loser pays $5 to a charity of the other's choice. Higher dynasty value after year 2 and higher dynasty value after year 3. So each year, loser pays $5 to a charity of the other's choice. JP, how you feel about this? You feel confident?
Oh, I do. I feel pretty good. Everybody heard how confident I am for AD and how I feel the opposite on Worthy, and vice versa for you. So yeah, I feel pretty good.
All right, we'll try to make the rest of these a little bit more concise. We were very excited about that one. If you could not feel that energy. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to throw it to our next player. That player is Bucky Irving. And David, can you take us into the athletics with him real quick?
I'm arguing for Bucky Irving, so this is kind of a difficult topic for me to make a great case for. He did not test very well at the combine. That being said, he did hit 21.8 miles per hour on field. And based on what I've seen, which I do have to caveat this, Real Analytics, you have to be a scout to get their full database. But they do release top ball carrier speeds of the week every week. So people are able to track that. It doesn't necessarily mean that maybe your fastest speed was the 6th fastest in the week. So maybe this isn't your fastest speed. However, at 21.8 miles an hour, that is a good time. And of the times that we saw, that's 3rd behind Benson and Wright. So didn't test well, but we've seen it on the field. He is pretty athletic.
And you painted his athleticism in a higher light, but his 40 time, it was not something that we'd love to see. His size adjusted speed score was 27th percentile. The burst score was 7th percentile, and his BMI was 28.4 with him being at 5'9", 192 pounds, which that BMI is 17th percentile. So for somebody who is smaller and not as athletic, that does, that shoots up a red flag for me.
We see that the against side is looking pretty strong after the athletics argument. David, I'm going to give you an opportunity to make up some ground with your production profile. What do you have for me?
Sure, it's actually pretty fun, and I think if you remember before the combine, he was top 3 running back for a lot of people, and production was a big reason why. He had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons to end his career, and he added 299 and 413 yards receiving, respectively, 6.2 career yards per carry. Of the backs in this draft class, he's top 10 in PFF offensive grade, rushing grade, and receiving grade. He's top 10 in yards after contact per attempt, missed tackles forced, 10-plus yard runs, 15-plus yard runs, targets, receptions, receiving yards, and elusive rating. It's a lot of things that look very good on paper. Plus had 69 missed tackles forced as a runner and 21 as a receiver. Both are top 5. Also top 5 in missed tackles forced per attempt. We've got 1 career fumble on 475 rushing attempts. We've seen some statistics that are pretty translatable from college to the pros, like yards after contact per attempt, missed tackles forced per attempt, explosive percentage, yards per out run. Those things are all very translatable. So when you stack him up with the running backs from the classes between 2019 and 2023, His yards per contact per attempt, or yards after contact per attempt, was 88th percentile. Missed tackles forced per attempt, 98th percentile. His explosive percentage, 92nd percentile. And yards per route run was 90th percentile. So all things look very good on paper. And then the last thing I'll say on the statistical profile, between the years of 22 and 23, he had 7 points per game in PPR scoring from just receiving. So he can do it out of the backfield as a receiver, and that's really important for the NFL, especially if you're going to be small like him.
Yeah, well, before the combine came around, I was pretty excited about Bucky Irving. I was hoping that he would have a better combine because, as you mentioned, his efficiency stats they were pretty darn good. The one thing that I can bring up is his pass blocking grade with 23.6 on PFF, which is really, really low. That's not good. With the rest of my argument, I'm just going to move to my closing argument here because I don't have a whole lot to say about his production because it did look good. But with the way it's sitting right now, he's not projected for day 2. And when I looked at Sleeper and pulled up the top 30 running backs last year and identified how many were below 200 pounds, there were 4 of the 30. We had Achane, Kyren, Gibbs, and James Cook. That's 13% of the top 30. Achane, though, he had an 88th percentile speed score. Cook, 79th percentile. Gibbs, 91st. So these guys, they were small, but they were very explosive. You do have Kyren, though, which is pretty interesting because he was small and unathletic. Guys, we didn't really expect a whole lot from him, and he broke out. So I guess if Bucky Irving were to have, a great NFL career, he kind of would have to have that kind of trajectory that Kyren had.
Yeah, I want to comment on that list of names you gave real quick, something that kind of stood out to me. We have Gibbs and Achane rookies, Kyren and Cook in their second year, I believe. So I think maybe this is a sign of things changing, which it is projection, but I think the way the rules are changing, the way offenses are getting more creative, we're seeing an ability for smaller backs maybe to have a little bit more of a role than they used to. But I will also say he's a true junior, so he's coming out early. He's going to be 22 during this season, so he has time to get a little bigger, a little more athletic. And some things Daniel Jeremiah said really stood out to me. He said these on the Bootleg podcast the other day. First, he comped him to Devin Singletary. Not elite, but hey, we're talking about a day 3 guy most likely, as JP alluded to. I'll take Devin Singletary on day 3, and I'll be happy about that. He's probably going to be a 3rd-round pick in most rookie drafts. Daniel Jeremiah went on, though, to say he's a receiving threat who can make people miss and has a clear, defined role. We want defined roles in the NFL, especially for our running backs when there's so many committees. And then the final thing that I want to point out that Daniel Jeremiah said, which I think is really important given that he's small and had poor testing, is that he doesn't have to slow down to make guys miss. He's very efficient in his moves, and if you're not going to have the greatest top speed, not going to be able to get back to speed very well, not having to slow down is very important. I don't love betting on outliers. I don't know that Bucky's going to be a top 5 running back. I did have to lower him a little bit after the athletic testing. But as you mentioned, JP, Kyren he was basically the same size, and he ran a 10th of a second slower, like a whole 10th of a second. It's 4.55 to 4.65, I believe. So it's not like Bucky is cripplingly slow. It's just he's slow for his size.
Yeah, you guys both definitely introduced some good arguments to both sides. Please let us know in the comments who you have on this topic, whether you're pro or against Bucky.
All right, so the next player that we have up here is another running back, and that is Wisconsin Badger Braelon Allen. Justin, you are going to be debating the 4 side on Braelon Allen, so give me a rundown on his athletics.
Yeah, so in my opinion here, we go from an unathletic Bucky to a pretty athletic Bucky. I am very disappointed that he did not run at the combine. He had an ankle injury. He never really shook and wasn't able to prepare for it, didn't run at the combine, did not run at his pro day either. A lot of sources I saw projected him to run a 4.4 based on high school times. Things I've seen on the field as far as top speed make me think that that is within the realm of possibility. I do think that his top end speed is better than his agility and acceleration personally, but do love somebody his size, 6'1", 230 range that has that speed. I wish he ran at the combine. I stand for this man, and I'm worried I'm doing it for the wrong guy. I'm worried it's my Badgers fandom a little bit. I have to admit that. However, I'm hopeful.
I know he was hurt, and it is what it is. But I really wish we could have gotten some athletic testing. I think that would have been really important for him. 6'1", 235. You need to make sure he's nimble enough and fast enough. The biggest knock, the only concrete evidence I could find, was again referencing Real Analytics and the data that they released to us. So he might have had a faster speed on record somewhere. I don't have access to that data. The fastest we saw was 20.1 miles per hour, and that ranks 14th out of the 19 running backs in this class that we have this data on. So not excellent at all, in my opinion.
All right, Justin. So let's take a jump over to the statistics. How did he look from a statistical standpoint? Because I think that's what people most like about Braelon Allen.
Yeah, so as a 17-year-old true freshman, he had a great breakout year in the Big Ten, playing against, solid Power 5 competition. 1,268 yards, 12 touchdowns, and a super efficient 6.8 yards per carry. He had a good season at 18 years old, 1,242 yards, 11 touchdowns, but did have a decrease in efficiency to 5.4 yards per carry. Had a worse junior year with 984 yards, 5.4 yards per carry, but still 12 touchdowns. He also increased his receptions, 8 for 39 in freshman year, 13 for 104 sophomore year, 28 for 131 as a junior. Not making a case for a pass-catching role in the NFL, just saying that he's gotten better, and I'm going to strengthen that argument that I think he can keep improving in my closing arguments.
Yeah, I mean, I think not a receiving back is fair and maybe even an understatement. 0.73 yards per out run over his career. Like you said, 132 receiving yards was his best season. I mean, hey, maybe it's just that they didn't ask him to do it. But when we're talking about a big back like this, you'd really like to see it. He's also only an average pass blocker for his size, so that brings into question third downs for me. He did have an excellent freshman year, but he decreased his rushing yards every season thereafter. So you would have really loved to see increases more so. And I know they had an offensive change last year, but he was still utilized significantly. And they kind of weird hybrid where they tried to spread it out some, but they also did the traditional Wisconsin ground pound quite a bit. And then I'm going to go back to some of those stats I was talking about with Bucky here, that same group, 2019 to 23 running backs. He was about average in career missed tackles forced per attempt. He was below average in explosive rate and yards per out run. And then this is a big one for me. 9 career fumbles. That's not good. That's, you want that especially for a goal line short yardage guy. You don't want to worry about fumbles there. And then this is probably the biggest sore thumb that I saw. Is the third lowest percent of rushes into a heavy box. Can't really dictate that as an offense, even though it's at Wisconsin. I found that very weird. But he only had the second fewest yards per carry against the heavy boxes. Not something you want to see from a guy whose best attribute is his size. But like I said earlier in my argument, though, they did do a lot of ground and pound this year. It was probably poor planning on the offense's part to try and split between two extremes like that. So I get 23 maybe is a little bit of a knock, but still, you'd really like to see him do better against heavy boxes, I think. And then I'll just go ahead and go into my closing arguments here. We've already covered most of it. But, from scouts, you see a lot of them say something along the lines of he doesn't run like a big back. He's a big back. He should run like a big back. He doesn't run through people. And that's a big concern for me. And then the last thing I'll say, which is very narrative-based and not something you should base an evaluation on necessarily. I heard him get compared to A.J. Dillon, and I just can't get it out of my head, man. They have a lot in common. I hope Allen's better. I think Allen's better. I like him better as a prospect coming out than I liked A.J. Dillon. But man, if that's even like a median outcome, I'm out for sure.
I hope he does not become A.J. Dillon. But this young man did not start playing RB until the spring year before college, which he went into a year early. He was 17 when he played spring football because of COVID, which, by the way, he was 17 when he was running wild all over the Big Ten. His team was 9-4 his freshman year. Then they went to 7-6 the following year. And that's when his efficiency dropped. He was playing around a worse football team. And this final year, this North-South runner, as I was mentioning, in air raid, they put him into an air raid system. They kind of went back and forth between trying to go with this air raid and realizing we probably have better personnel for ground and pound, not any consistency, trying this new system. The whole team struggled as a result. It really was not great coaching, in my opinion. I don't think the NFL is going to try to use him in an air raid system. I think someone's going to draft him to do what he did his freshman and sophomore year. He's also insanely young, as I mentioned. He's only been playing RB for 3 years. Is someone that, if he had ran that 4.4 at the combine, I think he's capable of, we'd be talking about taking him at the 1-2 turn. I'm not that high on him, but in the mid-second, if he has a decent landing spot, or potentially way higher if he has a great one, like if the Cowboys take him, I think he has the same ceiling as any RB in this class as RB1. Probably my fandom, but I don't care.
I'm definitely interested to see where he's going to go in the NFL draft, and that's going to be super important for these running backs along with the landing spots.
Speaking of Big Ten running backs that people are in and out on, they're hot, then they're cold, they're yes, then they're no. We're going Blake Corum next. JP, you have the 4 side, so start us off with what you like about him athletically.
Let me talk about the good stuff here because I know David's going to talk about the not ideal stuff here, but he is very agile and strong. His agility from the combine, his 3-cone and shuttle were both ranked in the top 90th percentile from historical RAS data, and his agility score is 94th percentile. So this guy is extremely quick. And what was really shocking, if you listen to our Rookie Crush video, you hear David talk about Xavier Legette's bench reps. This little short guy, Blake Corum, he was very impressive on the bench press as well. He had more bench reps than all other running backs. That includes big boy Braelon Allen and all the guys like Estime that are bigger than him. It was more than all the linebackers in the class, all the safeties, and more than all the defensive ends outside of Jared Verse. I mean, that's just absurd. He is extremely strong, and he didn't even have the 2 full months of combine prep. He was in the college football playoff, the national championship, so he didn't get that extra month or so of training, prepping for the combine. But he's 5'8", 205 with a 31.2 BMI, which is actually pretty solid with the BMI. And I just think he can handle the workload with what we saw in college and with that agility and that strength.
Yeah, if like my car breaks down in an intersection and I need help pushing it out of it, maybe I'll give him a call. I'm just not quite sure how important bench reps are for a running back, though. It's fancy, it's nice to see, but what does it do on the field? I'm not sure. And, if we're going to point out that Bucky's short and slow, Corum is shorter and ran 0.02 of a second faster in the 40. I know he's heavier, and that is important, and I'm not going to deny that or avoid that, but he's also not that big. I mean, he has a good BMI, but that's mostly because he's short. 205 is not the kind of weight you would expect for someone who's like a 3-down back necessarily. So, I don't know. He is a pretty solid athlete, but I don't think he's elite by any means.
JP, go ahead and tell us what you like about his statistical profile.
There is a lot to like about his statistical profile. He scored very well in PFF. He was the highest graded running back in 2022, this year prior. The draft class, of the whole draft class, he had the best career PFF rushing grade. He had the best goal-to-go PFF grade. And on the first and second down, the early down work, he had the best rushing grade there as well. He looks very, very favorable there. So in 2022, the guy had over 1,400 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns. And in 2023, this past season, he was less efficient, but he had 27 rushing touchdowns. That's just absurd.
Yeah, so, that 22 season was definitely good. I think actually the PFF grade was maybe the highest they've ever given or the highest offensive player they've ever given. I'll get back to why I don't value the 22 data quite as heavily right now. But first, last year, less than 5 yards per carry. That's not very good. Despite running into the second highest percentage of heavy boxes, he had the 3rd lowest yards per carry into those heavy boxes. It's not very efficient. 40th percentile yards after contact per attempt in that group that I've been referencing. 54th percentile missed tackles forced per attempt. 38th percentile explosive run percentage. So none of those very good. Not awful either in any of those, but about average. Not something you're looking for, though. We don't care that much about average backs. He had one season over 120 receiving yards, and in no seasons did he have multiple receiving touchdowns. Remember how Bucky had 7 PPR points per game from receiving over the last 2 seasons? Blake Corum had 2.2 in that same span, and that includes his excellent 2022 season. Not going to bring you much from the receiving game. Just go ahead and go into my closing arguments here off that. He's also not the best pass blocker, 50.3 pass block grade from PFF. So small, not a good pass blocker, not a good receiver. Again, gives me concerns about usage. The big thing, he's going to turn 24 during this season. We do historically see running back production drop off, typically after your age 26 season. If you play Dynasty like we do, maybe that doesn't bother you as much. You play running backs in kind of a 1-year window, maybe a 2-year window, but he really has to hit the ground running to have some solid seasons. And then my last thing I want to talk about is the difference between the 22 and 23 seasons. He tore his meniscus at the end of the 22 season, which is why he went back to school most likely. I'm not sure what happened. I don't think it healed properly. So when you compare the data, he had 500 less yards on only 50 less carries. He had 1 less yard per carry. He had 0.8 less yards after contact per attempt. His missed tackles forced per attempt went from 0.9 to 0.09. Runs of 10 plus yards on 15% in 22, down to only 9% in 23. Breakaway percentage down from 40% to 30%. His elusive rating went from a mediocre 97.5 down to 25.3. So I don't know what went on there, but clearly something happened. I thought he was an excellent back after 22. I thought if he would have come out there, he would have had a good shot of going pretty high, if not for the injury. I've seen it, so I understand the upside case, but man, that decrease in deficiency is just something I can't ignore.
Yeah, no, you got that right. His efficiency did drop off, and I wonder. I do tend to think that the meniscus tear is what affected it, because as I illustrated with the statistics, over the whole career of this whole running back draft class, his efficiency stats was like the best among the class in a lot of different categories. So if you look at it as a whole, his whole career, he was fantastic. So I just think that it is maybe because he was recovering from that knee injury. And teams just knew how run heavy they were. I mean, they were one of the best teams all year. They had second half leads all the time. So I think that teams knew in the second half that they're going to run the ball. They're going to give it to Blake Corum. So I think that they were more inclined to, stop him. I think yards per carry, that does kind of lower that a little bit. Yeah, he is a little bit older, like you said, and that does stink from like a dynasty value standpoint. Obviously, like you said, it's not because of talent though. He could have came out last year. I just think with the workload that he did handle, and when you look at the NFL draft, I think that the NFL likes him from the projections that I do see. And the Chargers being at the top of the third round, I do think that maybe he doesn't fall past that point. They did sign Dobbins, so I'm not sure if that is 100% true. But I kind of tend to think that he's either being drafted at the top of the third or before that. But I can't say for sure. I just think that he was such a good running back in college, and teams know that he can handle the workload, how tough he is, and how much of a leader he is. I think that they're going to value that.
Let us know in the comments if you're in or out on Blake Corum. And if you're a doctor, make sure to also let us know if you're in or out on his meniscus in the comments below, even if you're just a YouTube doctor.
So let's spend a little time talking about Audric Estime. JP, I think you're giving us the pro side. Why don't you tell us a little bit about his athletic profile?
Sure. Yeah, his athleticism, his combine strength wasn't the best. That's not really the basis of my pro argument here. He ran a 4.7 140, which, that was not what we wanted to see, unfortunately. I will say he did have the third best explosive run rate, though. So I do think that he does have some explosion to his game as well.
Thanks for doing half my work for me, JP, by mentioning that 40 time. We did also see that still not great pro day 40 time with some real great hand timer magic to try to trim the time down. I don't know. I've seen anywhere from it was 0.03 seconds faster to maybe it was 4.58. His RAS score comes in at 6.52. He is actually impressive in some categories, but the speed drags him down so much. And I don't see how this athleticism that he has is going to really translate to much more than a 2-down bruiser. Could get a goal line workload, but I think it's really going to limit his upside in the NFL.
Sure. JP, I think we were all a little excited about him before the combine for a reason. So tell us a little about what he did on the field.
Yeah, statistically, he looks like a very good running back. As a sophomore, he had 11 rushing touchdowns. He had 18 this past year. That kind of lends itself to what Justin said. I think at bare minimum, he's going to be a good goal line running back or third down, short to go situations. When looking at PFF's top 50 running backs in this draft class, I mentioned Estimate, he jumps off the screen as one of the best draft running backs in this draft class. But this is looking at the whole career numbers. He had the third best yards per carry behind only Tyrone Tracy, who was a wide receiver for most of the career, and Jalen Wright, who he was only 0.1 behind, and I think Jalen Wright ran against lighter boxes for the most part with their offense being more spread out. He had the third best PFF rushing grade as well over his career, and against stacked boxes, which, like we mentioned with goal line and short yardage situations, he's going to be used there. So he had the best PFF rush grade with stack boxes. So that's something you love to see. If you're going to want him to be a goal line back, he's going to get it done in that department. He also had the lowest stuff rate, which, man, he's not really losing yards much. And like I mentioned earlier, he had the third best explosive run rate. So I think that shows he's not giving you many negatives, and he is still giving you some explosive plays as well. So I think that he is a good running back. He pops off in a lot of these statistics.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely, when you look at his counting numbers, the yards per carry, you're going to see a lot of really great things. He had a good junior year or sophomore year, 156 carries, 920 yards, 11 touchdowns. You mentioned the touchdowns. His senior year, 210 carries, 1,341 yards, 18 touchdowns. Looks really great on paper. I wanted to dig a little bit into how that actually happened. And so the only 4 games they played against ranked opponents in the middle of the season, he had a stretch where he only ran for 266 yards in those 4 games, where we saw a 6-game stretch, not in a row, but 6 easier games against a 3-9 Stanford team, Wake Forest, Pitt, CMU, NCSU, that's North Carolina State, not NCIS, and Tennessee State. All of this production of 893 yards in those 6 games came in blowouts. They won a combined 301-81. And this year, they were the 6th ranked offensive line in the country, and about 60-something% of his yards there came in those blowouts. And they had other blowouts that he had big games too. I just picked the biggest yardage totals, looked at the game scripts. He's beating up on tired, dejected teams that are down by 30, 40 points. I just kind of think with the lower athleticism, the fact that he's not necessarily going to be running behind an offensive line that's incredibly better than the defenses he's playing against, I worry a little bit about how that production is going to translate to the NFL. So to transition to my closing statements, I do actually not dislike Estime. However, he needs good NFL draft capital. I'm hoping for 4th round or earlier. Obviously, if we're 3rd round, we're probably getting a little more excited. But the problem is, if he gets that draft capital, I think he's going to be going in the mid-3rd, and I really don't want him any earlier than the late 3rd, hopefully early 4th. That's when I start to really get interested in him. So I think he could end up being a little bit overpriced for me.
Yeah, I do think that this is a little bit of a price argument, because I do think in the 3rd round that's kind of where I think he's going to be, and I think he could be a pretty good value at that spot. When you dig a little deeper, his burst score, it was 87th percentile actually, so he's pretty good there. His college dominator was good at 31.1%. The yards per carry, as I mentioned, is great, and he's also very young as well. He's going to be 20 at the time of the NFL draft. He doesn't turn 21 until September. And I just think that with his production, the size, and I don't know how much teams are going to value that 40-yard dash time. Maybe some teams are just like, whatever, it's just one blemish on their profile of how they evaluate him. But I think that teams are going to take him, and I think they're going to have a role for him in the NFL. And if he finds himself onto an explosive offense, I think that he could have one of those high touchdown seasons, even if it does come in a LeGarrette Blount style.
As long as he doesn't punch anyone, right?
Please don't do that.
All right, good arguments, fellas. Let us know down below who you think won, how we're feeling about Estime.
Now, we had a lot of fun discussing those polarizing prospects, but it was a little bit more of a competitive, fiery fun at points. we're going to get into a little bit of more old-fashioned fun with a little NFL draft, kind of where are they going to go? What are the landing spots? In what order are the top wide receivers and quarterbacks going to go in the NFL draft? So we were going to do quarterbacks and wide receivers for this. However, when we all separately did our quarterback ranks, we saw we had unanimously Caleb to the Bears as the first quarterback, Jaden as the second to the Commanders, May as the third quarterback to the Patriots, and JJ as the fourth quarterback to the Vikings. Just to clarify, when we say fourth quarterback, we didn't need to pick fourth pick overall, just that he would be the fourth quarterback off the board. So given that, we decided to build a game with just the rookie wide receivers where, again, we try to pick the location and the positional order. So will it be the first, the second, the third wide receiver off the board, and so on. Scoring, and we'll touch on this next week, see how we did. Rookie wide receivers, you get a point for the correct draft order within the position. So if you say, I think this guy is going to be the wide receiver 3, that's 1 point. You get an additional 3 points if you hit the landing spot correctly, saying, I think that the Chiefs are going to take him and he's going to bust because most of their wide receivers bust. Just kidding. Rice was actually pretty good last year. But just an example, you'd get 3 points for that. Minus 3 points if you name a wide receiver who ends up not going in round 1. So, who do you have as the first wide receiver off the board, JP?
So I have Marvin Harrison Jr., and I have him going to the Chargers because I had projected a quarterback trade up. I thought I had the Vikings trading up to number 4 with the Cardinals to take J.J. McCarthy. So the Chargers were sitting here with Marvin Harrison Jr. on the board. And I think that they are a candidate to trade back in bulk of the O-line because Hardball likes that hard-nosed style of ball. But I just think Marvin Harrison Jr., he's not going to be able to pass up this guy. He got a real close look at him, playing against Ohio State. And, in fact, little known fact is Jim Harbaugh threw the Marvin Harrison Sr.'s first receiving touchdown.
JP dropping just nuggets of knowledge. I love that one.
Yeah, I also have Marv going first. I just have him going to the Cardinals. I think when push comes to shove, they're going to decide he's too good to pass up and trade out of that pick for.
Yeah, I am in the same boat as you there. I think the type of package it would take for them to give up this generational wide receiver might just be more than they'd get. I think that he's going to the Cardinals as well. Now I'm going to throw it to you first, David. Where do you have Neighbors going?
I actually have him as the third wide receiver in the draft. He's still second in my rankings, even with these landing spots. Unfortunately, I also have him going to the Giants, which would not be the most fun landing spot, but they desperately need a playmaker. And I saw the draft falling this way, and I think if Neighbors is there at 6, then they have to take him.
I actually have him going the second wide receiver off the board to the Chargers. I think kind of a similar case that JP made, except I think that Neighbors is that good, and they will take him rather than trading down or taking O-line.
And I'm with you, Justin. I think he's going to be the second wide receiver off the board, and I have him going to the Giants just like you do, David.
The third wide receiver off the board, I have Odunze sliding away to the Jets at 10. Part of it's a little bit of hopium that he doesn't go to the Bears at 9.
I have him going as my second receiver. I'll be honest, a lot of this, I've heard some Chargers beat reporters lately say that Odunze is the guy there. Who knows if that's true at all, but, for the sake of this game, it seemed like enough for me to make that switch.
I see. You got him ahead of Neighbors here. I have him as the third wide receiver, and I have him going to the Cardinals. And I think that in this scenario, like I said, they trade back from 4 with the Vikings, and I think that they might trade up with maybe the Falcons or the Bears at 8th or 9th to jump up to grab their new wide receiver 1 in Odunze.
They would have to do that so the Jets would not get him. So that's a good call there, JP. Now, JP, walk me through where you have Brian Thomas Jr. going.
Yeah, I mean, this has already been a little tough, but this is really where it gets a little extra tough because I I could have put Brian Thomas Jr. a number of spots, but I have him going as the fourth wide receiver out the board, and I have him going to the Broncos, and that's because Sean Payton, he said, Jerry Jeudy, get out of here. We'll take a few nickels for you, and they've been shopping Courtland Sutton as well. And Courtland Sutton, I don't really know if he loves him as his wide receiver one, so I think that he's going to want to get a wide receiver after Marvin Mims didn't really work out.
I have him also as the fourth receiver. I'm going to Jacksonville. I think maybe some of this is, as we've said, hopium. I think it's a great fit. I think he would be great for Trevor Lawrence. So that's kind of where I want him to go, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going sooner than that.
He will, in fact, go sooner than that because he will be the fourth wide receiver off the board going to the Colts at 15. So can't go to the Jaguars when he already went to the Colts, David. You got to think about that first.
Fair.
And David, tell me, where do you have A.D. Mitchell going?
Sure. I have him as the sixth wide receiver going, actually, and I didn't map out this trade at all, so maybe it wouldn't work out. But hey, we're playing a game here. We're having a little fun. Carolina needs a guy. They need an X. I know Deontay can play X if he needs to, but I think it'd be better if you could move him around a little bit and then slide Mingo inside. So I think Carolina needs a receiver. I think they have the capital to move up. I'm predicting a trade up into the first round, the back of the first round, to take A.D. Mitchell.
That is spicy. I like it. And you have him as the sixth wide receiver off the board. I have him as the fifth, going to the Jaguars. They are in sore need of an outside wide receiver. They brought in Gabe Davis, but I think they're going to want a little better of a wide receiver talent after Calvin Ridley left.
Yeah, I have the same thing there. I think all three of us definitely identified they need that big-bodied X receiver type, whether it is BTJ or discount BTJ, A.D. Mitchell. I think that they are probably taking that prototype of a wide receiver in the first round. Next wide receiver in our consensus sort of averaged out rankings, I have Ladd sixth to the Cowboys. I love this as a potential landing spot. It's not one you hear talked about a lot. I know that it's a team that has some other potential needs, but Jerry Jones, he loves brand new toys. And when you think about it, right, like Brandon Cooks as a wide receiver 2, it's like the Drake, but Brandon Cooks is a wide receiver 3. I think that taking Ladd as the wide receiver 2 across from CD just allows them a lot of flexibility. This is a little bit of a hopium landing spot as well. I think it's possible. I don't know if they're looking at wide receiver in the first round, but if they do this, I'm so excited. I would love this landing spot. So little hopium.
Kind of me too with having Ladd go to the Bills. I have him as the seventh receiver, actually. I do think his production profile probably pushes him down a smidge. We saw, I don't know if you saw, Brandon Beane was interviewed recently talking about what kind of receiver they want. He mentioned more guys that have flexibility to move around to different positions to maintain flexibility within the offense. I kind of thought they'd want an X, but that's not the way that he's talking about it. Could just be a smokescreen. But, I think they like to move guys around there, and I think Ladd would be a really fun fit.
That's pretty funny. I was going to mention the Brandon Beane quote as well, funny enough. He said he doesn't need a wide receiver one. He just needs a, versatile group like you mentioned. So, yeah, that does kind of make me think maybe they do go Ladd. I think they want a wide receiver as well. They need to really round out that group. And I have him as the sixth wide receiver on the board. And David, he's your seventh. And AD was your sixth. So I'm interested to see who your fifth wide receiver off the board is.
Well, I think you know.
It's probably the best wide receiver.
Don't tell me.
In the Texas Longhorns.
Oh my goodness.
This is funny to me. You have him last out of us too, Justin. That's great. Sorry, that's funny.
Next wide receiver all three of us see going in the first round, Xavier Worthy, I actually have as the eighth wide receiver off the board to the Kansas City Chiefs. Possibly a little bit of hopium here because I love the landing spot, but I also could see a world where it happens. He's very frequently mocked there.
Yeah, I thought about that one too, just for fit and fun. But I also thought, that 4.21 speed's probably going to push him up the board a little bit. Man, with how creative Sean McVay is, you put him in motion pre-snap on every play, he can't get caught up to. They've used smaller speed receivers, Tutu Atwell, even when Brandon Cooks was there. I just think he's someone that they know that they can have fun with that archetype, and they don't have that currently with Puka and Cup. I think he's a great fit there.
Yeah, I got Xavier Worthy going to the Steelers, which I actually have him as a 6th wide receiver off the board. I have Ladd 7th, but yeah, I just think that with Deontay Johnson being out of the room, I think that he gives a nice element that they can move around, because I think Pickens, he's that great, outside X press beating wide receiver, and Worthy, that's kind of his weaker spot. So I do think that it would be interesting to have Xavier Worthy with George Pickens.
And the last guy that I have sliding into the first round, I have the Bills taking Xavier Legette at the very back end. I'm not really buying that. They just want this flexible guy. I also don't necessarily think Ladd even makes it there. I think that they're going to take this guy who can burn defenses, just a super fast size speed freak. And he's someone I'm seeing getting mocked in the first round with some regularity. I've seen the Lions taking him in a couple mocks, etc. And I think it's a fit that could end up making some sense here. I also just wanted to take a risk so that I could beat you guys in this game, even more importantly.
I think you're going to lose now.
I almost put him in the first 2, but I decided not to. I was at work when we were finalizing this game, and I didn't have the patience to keep going.
It's too bad. We could have both beaten JP then. I don't know if I see him going first round personally, but yeah, I have seen him mock there, and he does have that size, and speed that they like, but I don't know. I just don't expect it personally.
So we will let you guys know, of course, in next week's long form episode how we did in this game. Please let us know where we were wrong in the comments below. We're excited to hear from you in what we did wrong. If there's any other first round wide receivers, any other first round QBs, we didn't necessarily all think that there's not going to be any first round QBs. I think we all think Bo Nix has a pretty good chance of going there. We were more excited about the wide receivers because it's more fun. But let us know what you think about all those topics. We're excited to, again, engage, hear from you in the comments below. So thank you for joining us for another episode of our Dino Construction podcast. We hope you found this as helpful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like, subscribe wherever you view. And from all of us at Dino Construction, until next time.